Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm very happy to introduce Caitríona Mordan. Caitríona is the cluster manager at Advanced Technologies in Manufacturing, atim for short. And the atim cluster brings together, at this point, over 70 members from industry, academia, and government, which includes a diverse membership with many industry leaders specializing in engineering, polymer, food and drink, medical devices, as well as technology solutions for manufacturing. So it's a pretty broad remit, and it's great to have the cluster manager, Caitríona, here with us today. So welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, let's get into it, Caitríona, because as the cluster manager of atim, as I've discussed, this atim cluster, you really are, I think, at the forefront of helping companies, obviously in Ireland's, Midlands, transition to what I know you've often termed as, industry 3.0, industry 4.0 now is the term, and industry even 5.0. So can you maybe take a moment, give us a little bit of background to that, and how do you see the technologies maybe shaping international business, and what role does ultimately atim play when it comes to helping these Irish companies ultimately, I suppose, compete on a global stage?
Well, I suppose you mentioned there, obviously there's the manufacturing focus to the cluster. We were set up in 2021, I started in the role. So with the Regional Technology Cluster Fund, it's a fund, it's listed there as we need to build more robust ecosystems for many of our SMEs in particular and our industry more generally. And obviously the manufacturing sector, in general, is a really strong sector for Ireland. In the Midlands in particular, it probably outweighs that. There's some stats out there that reports we employ 18% of people in manufacturing in the Midlands compared to 12% nationally. So if we look at the competitiveness in terms of that, obviously with all of these major challenges like digitalization, sustainability coming down the line, if we don't support this cohort and this sector within the region, to adapt, in a seamless way and in an accelerated way to take on these technologies and to take on these practices, they will be left behind. And if we look comparatively across Europe and globally, competition is tight within the sectors. We are now a highly skilled, highly advanced in terms of our manufacturing, but we are competing against those in, Eastern Europe, in Asia as well in terms of the products. So it's really important that we are able to engage with companies, try to inspire them as to what they could and should be doing by demonstrating it, but also to create kind of better, more fluid ways of them to adopt these technologies and adopt these sustainable practices. Obviously, that has an impact then if they do or if they don't on the region. And that's where the regional competitiveness would come in to the role of the cluster and the importance of engaging with all of these actors, as you mentioned, government, with universities, and the industry in those in those industries in that region, to bring them together to troubleshoot and solve some of the challenges that might fall out of the wheelhouse of those organizations if they just stick to their own lane. So it's about trying to bring those organizations together, identify where the gaps are and what we can do to plug them so that the innovation, for want of a better phrase, is not lost in those pots, that we try to harness it and use it as an opportunity.
Well, thank you for shedding some light on that. And it is staggering when you think about that sort of concentration of businesses that you have in that particular region compared to the national statistic, but also having the ability to have this atim cluster to help those companies, because as you say, it's a very competitive global market now. And obviously there's been an awful lot of innovation in your world over the last number of years. The innovation within that wider cluster of companies and the diversity of innovation just seems to be rapidly expanding, at least from my perspective. And it leads me nicely on to my next question for you, which is, obviously, as the cluster manager, you're involved in forging partnerships with sort of academia, with government entities to help drive that innovation. So could you share maybe a few examples of successful collaboration or how that sort of influenced the competitiveness in the manufacturing supply chain? Does that actually lead to a positive international impact for the cluster?
Yeah, so I can give some examples. Obviously, we have been, we're still relatively in our infancy. The first stage of the cluster was very much find out. It's very needs led. So, it's predominantly 60%, 70% is with industry, and it has to remain in that percentage profile because it's about serving the needs of the industry cohort. But ultimately, it's about saying, well, what is the burning issues? And my ultimate KPI is helping the companies grow. So the initial stages, we had no strategy. It was very much I came into the role, go and meet the people and find out what is their key challenge. So having met several companies, my role is to identify those critical linkages across companies big and small and what can support them, where are the gaps, and come up with initiatives to try and plug that gap and support them in the best way possible. When we first went out, one of the key issues that kept emerging was around talent. How can we attract people to the Midlands? The Midlands is known as the gateway region. Unfortunately, for many young people, they might not see it. They might see it as the gateway out of the region. And purely because they mightn't see that the opportunities, the great companies that are on their doorstep. So I could recognize that there was a huge challenge there. And as with the cluster, other entities had different focus that they were able to support the companies with, but it was about bridging that collectively together and about putting action behind it. So we came up with a talent development program called Dream Big. Dream Big stands for digitalization, robotics, engineering, automation, and materials. So how could we create, as a consortium, an opportunity to highlight, on one level, the number of significant SMEs and larger companies in the manufacturing space in our community, back out to the community and to young people, and also to reduce the level of resourcing that those companies needed to really provide meaningful engagement back to that cohort as well. So ultimately, we have moved from the first year of having 27 students involved in 5 companies to 2024, where we had 91 students across the 4 counties in the Midlands region, and we'd around 120 people involved with it. Like, what we're trying to do there is trying to bridge a gap, create meaningful engagement for young people, and to inspire them to engage and to see what's happening on the factory floors, and to create a better pipeline of talent coming through for those companies. So while that might not have international ability immediately for the companies to be competitive, it is a critical component of long-term competitiveness and resilience. And then through that, we're creating opportunities and critical relationships across those companies that sometimes they're in maybe the same industrial estate, but they haven't had an opportunity to come together and strategize and look at ways that they can collaborate from a business point of view. So sometimes you need an initiative like that to be the enabler or to be the glue that ignites that initial collaboration as well. If I look maybe from another perspective, how we supported, by I suppose identifying gaps and where opportunities lie. As you mentioned there with Industry 4, Industry 5, it is that collision of 2 worlds, your technology sphere and your manufacturing, which for many years obviously were very separate. Now it's so critical that we have this key vertical for manufacturing companies to embed the technology in a meaningful way so that they can be more efficient, more productive, and more competitive as well. And ultimately to be data driven so that they know where they are in terms of their timing, and know with a critical eye on one click of a button, how they're actually performing, because as you said, it's such a competitive space to be in. With the cluster, what we try to do is create spaces that create a neutral platform for companies that are on that solution side to engage in a natural way and in a very much in a dialogue-driven way around how they can support companies in that space. We also hold kind of initiatives, you know, several events over the course of the year that act really as kind of flagship events for that. One event, we partner with European entities as well, EIT Manufacturing, and we held an event in Irish Manufacturing Research where we were able to collate a number of industry challenges, the manufacturing challenges that companies had. And we were involved with trying to screen and put forward who we thought would be good solution providers to those particular challenges. The winner of that was Maverick, co-founded by Paul Burns in Limerick. And since then, through our support and with the support of EIT Manufacturing, they have now gone on to be successful on the European circuit and are now working with Volkswagen as well as a result of winning an additional competition after that as well. So it's small little things like that, but you know, it always starts with the people understanding the need and where people can meet others to try and progress that.
I really like that, Caitríona, and it's funny how some of those initiatives, albeit maybe small in their, you know, and in their infancy, as you're saying, but then they have a big impact, you know, and they start to move the dial. And I really like some of the things that you were talking about there, because you started talking initially about ultimately what you're trying to do is help these companies grow. And of course, growing their top line revenues, growing their, you know, their profitability, growing their bottom line, growing their exports, etc., of the products and services that they produce. But it also sounds like you had to really go in at a grassroots level from scratch and really get under the skin of what is it that's the challenge for these businesses. And you must have seen some commonalities there, because as you were saying, these companies may have been in the same industrial estate, the same business park, but not talk to each other, you know. So it's great to see how that helps. And I also liked what you were saying as well about Dream Big, the initiative, and the acronym for DREAM, in terms of attracting talent and putting maybe that awareness level that there are some fabulous companies growing and expanding here with the assistance of obviously all the great work that you're doing with the atim cluster. And can I ask you, at the same time we've got all this positivity and growth, one of the things, you know, you were talking lastly there about, you know, Industry 4.0 and 5.0. And one of the things with this onslaught of technology is also this huge importance around sustainability, particularly in the sort of industries and areas that you're working in. So if sustainability is this key pillar, if I can put it that way, of Industry 5.0, and it aligns closely with, you know, global climate goals, which we know it does, is the cluster involved in helping companies in Ireland adopt those sustainable practices, how they measure it, what are they doing, how do they communicate even the great work that they're doing, while also remaining, as we both said now, and you were just echoing it there, this competitive edge that you need in a global marketplace. So how does the sustainability work in sort of your world?
So for us, you know, sustainability is probably one of the top on the agenda. You know, if you look at manufacturing companies and any of those reports that come out, you know, they're heavy, intensive, heavy industries as well. You know, polymer, you're looking at kind of concrete construction, you know, it's critical. And if you look at competitiveness for Irish companies and Irish people, for many years, by our nature, they could be working with the client across Europe or further afield. They have a great relationship in terms of their customer service that could be second to none. And they've probably built a long-lasting relationship on that basis. But the reality is, when these measures come in, no matter how good that relationship is, if they don't have the paperwork to hand and if they're not ready for that, the business will be gone and it'll be outside of their hands. It will come down to a different mechanism for building, for keeping business and for gaining new, but also for losing some. So it depends on which side of the coin you are on. Like, our goal is to say, it's all about the timing piece. So how can we accelerate that piece of innovation? How can we give companies as a group the access to the best expertise, the best information, so that they can access that in the most meaningful way and embed it into their companies? So that involves bringing a group together. We have a subgroup or a special interest group, for example, on Corporate Social Responsibility Directive. We just had a session on it today where we had 20 companies on it as well. So we developed a boot camp. We kickstarted last March, and it's a neutral and a trusted space for many of those companies to come in. A really important key is, how can we share information with each other? You know, what are you doing on it? What are you doing? And it's to create this community of practice, because there's a lot of people selling to these companies, but they need to come from a practical approach. What do I need to do, and why do I need to do it, and what's out of scope for my business depending on the size? So this group has really gelled very well. Quickly, when we got into it after the second meeting or whatever, we began to collate a kind of comprehensive list of 8 areas that we needed to explore together. So after preparing that, I went back to the group and I said, you know, we double checked, are these the areas that we want to explore further? And we ranked them. And then with that information, my goal as cluster manager is to go to market almost and see, who can I bring in? Again, it's about getting the best expertise. So if you think of the SME community, sometimes they can't afford the big consultants, but they need that expertise because they're critical to their future competitiveness as well. And if these companies are engaging with the multinationals, they're being asked for this information now, even though they might not need to report on it for some time. So through that, I engaged with, we have now developed a CSRD bootcamp. We just finished the final session today, but ultimately that was working in collaboration with KPMG, with Irish Manufacturing Research under their factory exchange, and with Reshape, another training entity, a training project under TUS. What did we do? I suppose we completely co-created kind of 5 sessions where we supported companies develop insight into their double materiality assessment and all of those critical things that they're going to need to develop for their business. And what was the benefit, I suppose, for the members there? We managed through funding mechanisms, we got that for free. So it impacted their de minimis, but we got that, which is worth around 13,000 euros of individual time and support for the companies. We were able to get it through grant aid for the companies. And I think that's the power of a group coming together through a cluster, in terms of that collective ask, that we're now able to say, position-wise, there is a need here. And we're able to articulate that and draw in some of the supports that are critical for them to move ahead. And on the other side, it's saving them a lot of time, a lot of energy, trying to navigate that busy ecosystem themselves.
And I think what you're illustrating quite rightly is what a critical component this is to growing that business internationally, to growing that business in a positive manner. And, you know, the sharing of information, sometimes the measurement of how you do this, and bringing people together so you can put together almost this workshop, as you're saying, or these experts from industry who can come in and share with the cluster, and then it raises the bar, doesn't it? It gives them that advantage in the marketplace. So it's really great and inspiring to hear that. And I want to jump back as well, because you mentioned earlier that you were working with another group and that led to some success. And I wanted to ask you about the organization focusing on creating links with other organizations, other clusters, whether that's at a local level, a governmental level, or an international level. Is that really important to what you're doing now? Are you seeing that being a really important piece? But also, have there been some great learnings, maybe some advice that you'd give to other people looking to do something similar or to grow an industry cluster? Because it sounds like you've really had to write the book on this to some degree, if I can maybe put it that way, Caitríona.
So in relation to the clusters, I think it's so important that we are kind of representing the needs. But as we look at this kind of adaptive space that you could refer to around innovation, I mentioned it before, even with the technology and manufacturing, it's this interdisciplinary piece where you have, like, for example, maybe bioeconomy combined with construction, manufacturing with technology. And it's all of this it's that cross-sectoral approach where real innovation can happen and the huge opportunity. And with Enterprise Ireland, as I mentioned, we're funded under the Regional Technology Cluster Fund. There's actually 12 cluster managers that were appointed in those roles as well. So we would have regular and monthly meetings where, number one, we report on KPIs, but there's also a huge benefit and opportunity there to identify, based on our member need, where there's an opportunity for cross-sectoral collaboration. An example, being Cyber Ireland, based in Cork, is driven by Owen Byrne, and we collaborate from an OT for manufacturing side with some of the cybersecurity elements that he does as well. Similarly, with the bioeconomy cluster based out in Kerry, we are collaborating with them around the packaging piece and looking at kind of bio packaging and different opportunities for circularity with the packaging as well. So, there's a lot of companies to support, and, we have to live by what we try to endorse ourselves. We can achieve some of these great challenges through collaboration, and it's really important that we're able to collaborate with the other clusters in that regard as well. From an Irish point of view, obviously we are an island. We collaborate a lot through the shared island piece. We've great partners in Northern Ireland as well, and we're currently developing, a dynamic platform for all the polymer companies across the island of Ireland with our partners there in Northern Irish Polymer Association as well. If I look further afield to Europe, we are a registered cluster under the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, which is run by the European Commission. And that network is so valuable. Again, like any business or any entity, it comes down to relationships, but clusters have been pioneered, for example, in Spain for many years, some up to like 40 years in the Basque region in Spain, for example. And there's around 2,000 registered clusters across Europe with that entity. What we are trying to do is align ourselves with other clusters that we want to engage with, that we would have synergies with. There's huge benefits to that. We've engaged with, for example, clusters in France and Portugal. And what we're trying to do there at one level is support directly market opportunities for our members. But then at a cluster level, there's also an opportunity to identify where those synergies are and engage with European funding opportunities, which also provides additional benefits back to our members, because we might secure funding to do exploratory projects that might support both of our ecosystems as well. So we're very active in that space too.
It sounds like the network is growing substantially, and there's an awful lot of clusters talking to each other, and of course leading to funding, leading to shared information and growth.
Yeah.
And as you rightly say, and relationships and business too. So that it's great to hear that. We often hear on the news, don't we, that sometimes a company may close down a particular region and jobs get hit. And then we also hear the good news where a new company may come or start up or suddenly scale or invest in a new country and start up a facility. But coming back to, I suppose, what you were talking about earlier when it comes to talent attraction, upskilling and reskilling seem to be critical, particularly in the fields that you're talking about, because the technology is changing, the way things are happening are changing. We touched on sustainability earlier. And I'm wondering how your organization, the cluster, helps to address maybe that skills gap, whether it's Industry 4.0 or 5.0, because ultimately, I suppose, if I can put it in Ireland, in inverted commas, position in the global sort of manufacturing supply chain, it's not easy, because a lot of the jobs that were there 10 years ago, they're very different today, in that, completely different today. processes are different, the global supply chain is different. What are you doing around upskilling and reskilling? Is that a factor for the cluster?
It is. It's a factor, I think, specifically for the Midlands region, and that's why there's so many European Just Transition projects at the moment as well. But like anything, there's an opportunity there. You know, there is companies at the other side that, you know, desperately need people to meet that ambition and to grow. What we are trying to do is to try and bring the key stakeholders together, identify where those needs are, and we work in close partnership with the regional skills manager, the regional skills forum manager, John Costello, as well as being in TUS. So we have that kind of a bottom-up strategy, I suppose. Again, going back to that, what are the needs of the companies? Are those needs being met? If not, how do we bring stakeholders in a room and adapt what the provision is so that we can do that, they can meet their needs, and that there's no lag in time in terms of what they need to deliver on. We can see this kind of changing nature of what companies actually want and how they engage in upskilling as well. And we've been recently secured and are involved with a large project called Reshape, which is specifically focused on the Midlands and in terms of that upskilling piece as well. As you rightly said, you're looking at this intergenerational piece within many of the manufacturing companies, and those that might be slightly older and would have done things more manual. It's sometimes about giving them confidence and insight into how their pain might be eased by adapting to different technologies, and how they might be more efficient and buy themselves back more time. So I mentioned that we have kind of special interest groups. So we do have one around lean and continuous improvement as well. Like, an element to that is, how do we create a culture and an ecosystem across our manufacturing communities that they can go and witness what other companies might be doing, and to be sparked in terms of their ideas around that. And then it's always followed up by further action. So what could we do if they have that idea, and if they need support in that space? What does that support look like? You know, some companies might run 24-hour manufacturing lines as well. So, you know, if we're running courses during the day or the night or in the morning, is that course on at the right time for those shift workers? Is the mode in the right format for them? Because if they're doing something very practical on a machine, doing an online webinar is not going to teach them how to use the machine. So it's about working very much with the companies, and we can see this increased demand around more tailored kind of provision required, and also the kind of coaching element, you know. So how can we bring in some of those experts into the company so that they can really learn how to do it very much in line with what their company's needs are, rather than have the course maybe, you know, 20% relevant to what they actually need in the business as well. Because ultimately the manufacturing companies, they don't have the time to release people unless it's really going to inject something really tangible back into the organization as well.
A great point, and it sounds like there's an awful lot of shared learning there too, that is being helped by those sort of connections and networks that you were referring to earlier.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. The other thing I want to ask you before we run out of time is a little bit about digital transformation. The word came up earlier, but it's kind of critical in this industry 4.0, 5.0 world. Everything from enabling that real-time data sharing, the collaboration across countries, across borders. What's the cluster looking at when it comes to leveraging maybe the technologies that facilitate this sort of smoother international partnership that helps drive innovation across supply chain? Because digital transformation has been on the boardroom agenda for a while, but companies are still going through that quite a lot.
And sometimes, you know, again, we would have companies, you know, large right down to small. Again, it's about understanding what's on your doorstep and what does good look like. You know, many companies are still grappling with the term industry 4.0 and 5.0. Obviously, they've become more widely known, but what do they actually mean? And what does that factory actually look like? And what elements of that are relevant for me? Because if I am employing maybe up to 25 people, you know, I'm not going to have a site, you know, like the Lighthouse site, Coca-Cola and Ballina, or one of the IDA companies. It's not relevant. But at the same time, if they don't adopt and identify what they could bring in and the level of digitalization and automation which is relevant for their size, they will be left behind. So again, you know, sometimes we have these sweeping statements of what companies should and could do, but actually it's very bespoke to the company. So what we're trying to do is really, you know, there's a few levels here. We would say that we try to inspire the companies, and that's about bringing in those case studies, bringing in those experts that are relevant for them, and trying to create an ecosystem of sharing site visits, experts, and also demonstrating some of the great equipment that's available in their community, like Irish Manufacturing Research, for example. You know, there's a lot of test bed facilities there that they can engage with without heavily capital investment. The same here in TUS and Athlone, and we have members, you know, in AMEC, for example, in Belfast, right up all across the country as well. So there's great equipment on their doorstep, and huge capital investment has happened. So we tried to bridge that and say you can test it without investing in it as well, and that's an element. We, with all of our members, on terms of the onboarding piece, they can meet with my colleague, and we get a sense of where they want to position. Where is their pain point? Is it automation? Is it digitalization? So we have that as part of our repertoire and as part of their portfolio. And then as the need comes up, we can kind of match them with the opportunity, take their hand, if it's bringing them into those and creating a profile of where we think that the people they should meet, sites that they should see in terms of gaining that confidence. And then we'll work on an additional piece on what action do they want to take and how can we support with that. And then sometimes that comes in, is there money or is there a fund that could act as an enabler for them? So it's really about taking their hand in a very tailored way right through that process, while also creating that supportive community for them on a collective basis as well.
Yeah, and what I love about what you said there is it sounds very almost tailored in a way to the company's needs and requirements, but very realistic, very deliverable, something that they can execute on that will make a difference. And I loved what you said as well about there's an awful lot of, I'm paraphrasing, but there's an awful lot of lip service to what you should do, what you're supposed to do, but actually understanding what's going to help an individual business is really seems to be what it comes down to. And it brings me on to the last question I've got for you, Caitríona, which is obviously as businesses becoming more interconnected, networked, international, you know, things are changing at a rapid pace. What do you love about your role today? What do you like about the job that you're doing there? And what's on your agenda? What's on your roadmap? What are you thinking about for the year ahead?
Good question. You know, I live in the Midlands. You know, I worked for many years with Engineers Ireland, and I got to visit many companies there. For me, it's been able to connect, you know, I'm blown away by the people that you get to meet. You know, we talk about, you know, some of the leading tech giants or whatever, but within our community, we have people that, you know, they're engaging and delivering things, you know, to a level of excellence at a global stage. And for me, that's what drives me. Like, they're so dedicated. And if you look at any GA pitch or anything across our country and our community, it's those companies that give back continuously to our community as well. So it's a way for me to kind of serve them a little bit as well. And that's what keeps me going. I've made great friendships along the way as well. And for me, you know, it's about trying to connect in with them. It's, you know, being able to have a bit of fun, but actually be able to deliver for them in a serious way and ensure that, you know, in time that we're creating a value back to the communities that we live in. And if I can help in some tiny way along that journey, that's my job done. And that's what keeps me motivated.
I really like that. Thank you. That brings us nicely to the end of today's show with Caitríona Mordan. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world. I hope that you'll join me back and tune in again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where we'll again be discussing some more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world, just like Caitríona. But Caitríona, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Simon.